Kepler Station floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. Its arms stretched out in all directions, each one bigger than most cities. Ships from across the galaxy docked at its ports every day. Today was no different, except for the laughter that echoed through the station's halls. The source of that laughter was approaching Docking Bay 7. A human ship called the UES Liberty moved slowly through space, looking like it might fall apart at any moment. Its hull was gray and dented, covered in patches and welds that seemed older than some civilizations. Steam leaked from small cracks in its armor plating. "Look at that thing," said Commander Zilmoth as he watched from his observation deck. His purple skin gleamed under the station's lights, and his forearms gestured wildly as he spoke to his officers. "The humans actually think that Rust Bucket is a warship." The Veltar warriors around him clicked their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. Their own ships were sleek and beautiful, covered in energy shields that sparkled like diamonds. Plasma weapons glowed blue along their hulls, ready to turn any enemy into dust. At the docking control center, a crystal being named Zethkar processed the Liberty's approach. His body was made of living mineral that changed colors based on his emotions. Right now he was bright yellow with amusement. "Human vessel Liberty, you are cleared for docking at Bay 7, Zethkar announced over the communication system. "Please proceed to the maintenance section for older vessels." More laughter filled the station. Even the peaceful species like the fish-like Merdani seemed embarrassed for the humans. Their own ships looked like flowing water made solid, powered by systems that bent space itself. Inside the Liberty's bridge, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair and ignored the insults coming through the open channels. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and calm brown eyes. His uniform was simple and clean, unlike the flashy outfits worn by other species. "Sir, they're really laying it on thick today," said First Officer Lisa Grant. She was younger than her captain, with short blonde hair and a no-nonsense attitude. Her hands stayed steady on her controls despite the mockery echoing around them. "Let them talk, Lisa," Morrison replied. His voice was quiet but firm. "Words don't win battles." At the engineering station, Chief Engineer Pete Collins checked his systems one more time. He was a stocky man with grease stains on his coveralls and 30 years of experience keeping the Liberty running. The readings on his screens looked normal, even if his equipment appeared ancient compared to alien technology. "All systems green, Captain," Pete reported. "She's ready for whatever comes next." Weapons Officer Amy Turner nodded from her station. She was a former Marine with red hair tied back in a tight bun. Her console looked like something from a museum, with physical switches and metal dials instead of the holographic displays used by other species. "Weapons are loaded and ready, sir," Amy said. Her tone was professional, but there was steel in her voice that suggested she didn't appreciate the aliens' jokes. The Liberty shuddered slightly as it docked with the station. Through the viewports, they could see crowds of aliens gathering to stare at their ship. Some pointed with tentacles, others took pictures with devices that floated in the air. A few of the younger aliens seemed to be making jokes that got their elders laughing even harder. "Sometimes I wonder why we bother with diplomacy," Lisa muttered under her breath. "Because it's the right thing to do," Morrison answered. "Even when they make it difficult." The docking process finished with a loud clang that made several aliens jump. They had expected the human ship to dock quietly like their own vessels, but the Liberty used old-fashioned mechanical systems that were anything but subtle. Morrison stood up and straightened his uniform. "Lisa, Pete, Amy, you're with me. Let's go meet our new friends." The four humans walked through the Liberty's corridors toward the airlock. Their ship's interior looked just as old as the outside, with metal walls and pipes running along the ceiling. But everything was clean and well-maintained, showing the care of a crew that took pride in their vessel despite its appearance. As they reached the airlock, they could hear voices on the other side. The universal translators made it possible to understand what was being said, and none of it was flattering. "I heard humans still use chemical fuel," one voice said with obvious disgust. "And metal bullets instead of energy weapons," added another. "How primitive can you get? Maybe we should suggest they visit a museum instead of trying to play with real warships," said a third voice. followed by more laughter. Morrison paused with his hand on the airlock controls. His crew looked at him, waiting for orders. For a moment, something flickered in the captain's eyes. Not anger, but something deeper and more patient. "Remember who we are," he said quietly. "And remember what the Liberty has seen." The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The humans stepped onto Kepler Station's main deck, and the laughter died down slightly. Not from respect, but from curiosity about these strange beings who thought their ancient ship could compete with modern technology. The station's main deck was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. Shops and restaurants lined, the walls selling goods from 1,000 different worlds. The air smelled of exotic spices and recycled atmosphere. Representatives from dozens of species filled the space. The insect-like Hyveron clustered in groups, their compound eyes reflecting the station's lights. The gaseous Nathara floated in containment suits that let them interact with solid beings. Even the mysterious Void Walkers were present, though. They stayed in the shadows as always. But all eyes were on the humans and their impossible ship. Commander Zilmoth approached with his usual swagger. His armor was polished to a mirror shine, and energy weapons hung from his belt like trophies. Behind him walked several other Veltar warriors, all looking like they wanted to start a fight. "So these are the famous humans," Zilmoth said, his voice carrying across the deck. "Tell me, Captain Morrison, does that ship of yours actually fly, or do you push it through space with your hands?" More laughter rippled through the crowd. Some aliens seemed genuinely curious about the answer, while others just enjoyed the show. Morrison looked up at the Veltar commander without expression. "She flies just fine, Commander. Has for longer than you might think." "I'm sure she has quite a history," Zilmoth replied with mock respect. "Perhaps you could donate her to a museum when you're done pretending to be warriors." The insult was clear, but Morrison just smiled slightly. "The Liberty has her own story to tell. Maybe you'll hear it someday." Something in the captain's tone made a few aliens stop laughing. There was confidence there that didn't match his ship's appearance. But most of the crowd was too busy enjoying the joke to notice. As the humans walked toward the diplomatic section of the station, the mockery continued behind them. They had come here for routine talks about trade routes and mining rights. Simple, peaceful business that shouldn't have required a warship at all. But Morrison knew better than most that peaceful business had a way of becoming complicated very quickly. And when that happened, the galaxy would learn that appearances could be very deceiving indeed. The Grand Council chamber of Kepler Station was built to impress. The circular room stretched up 5 levels, with viewing galleries for different atmospheric requirements. Methane-breathing species sat in sealed boxes while water dwellers observed from tanks built into the walls. The floor itself was a marvel of engineering, adjusting gravity and temperature for each delegate's needs. Captain Morrison and his crew took their assigned seats in the human section, which felt almost empty compared to the crowded areas occupied by larger galactic powers. The 4 humans looked small and insignificant among the hundreds of alien delegates, exactly the image most species had of humanity's place in the galaxy. At the center of the chamber stood a massive holographic display showing star maps of the disputed territories. Trade routes glowed in different colors while resource-rich systems pulsed with soft light. These were the prizes that brought everyone together, and the sources of conflict that threatened galactic peace. The session began with routine reports from various trade guilds and mining consortiums. The Murdani spoke about disrupted shipping lanes in their territory. The Hyveron complained about pirates attacking their colony ships, standard business that usually got resolved with boring negotiations and careful compromise. But today was different. Today, the hegemony of Zorthak had something to say. Ambassador Kretak rose from his seat like a mountain coming to life. He was huge even by Zorthak standards, with gray skin that looked like stone and red eyes that glowed in the chamber's dim light. His species had been expanding across the galaxy for decades, absorbing smaller civilizations through a combination of military might and political pressure. "Honored delegates," Kretak's voice boomed across the chamber, "the hegemony has a proposal that will bring peace and prosperity to all." The chamber fell quiet. Everyone knew that Zorthak proposals usually meant trouble for someone. The outer, rim territories have become chaotic, Kretak continued. Pirates attack merchant vessels, colonies go undefended, resources are wasted through poor management. The hegemony offers protection and order to any system that accepts our guidance. It sounded reasonable until you understood what guidance meant in Zorthak terms. Complete surrender of independence in exchange for protection from threats that usually included the Zorthak themselves. The smaller species shifted nervously in their seats. The Merdani delegates whispered among themselves in their musical language. The Hive-Ran's compound eyes reflected worry and fear. They all knew they were too weak to resist Zorthak expansion alone. "And what happens to systems that refuse this generous offer?" asked Delegate Silmara of the Merdani, her gills fluttering with anxiety. Kretak's smile showed teeth like broken glass. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, honored delegate. Accidents happen, pirates attack, trade routes become unsafe. Better to accept protection while it's offered freely." The threat was clear but delivered with diplomatic language that made it hard to challenge directly. This was how the hegemony worked, offering choices that weren't really choices at all. That's when Kretak's red eyes fixed on Captain Morrison. "But some species seem to think they can provide protection with museum pieces," the ambassador said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Perhaps the humans would like to explain how their ancient rust bucket plans to defend anyone." Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber, especially from the military powers like the Veltar and the Korth Empire. The peaceful species looked uncomfortable, caught between hope that humanity might help them and fear that human weakness would leave them defenseless. Morrison stood slowly. His simple uniform looked plain and outdated compared to the elaborate outfits worn by other delegates, but his voice carried clearly through the chamber when he spoke. "The Liberty has kept the peace before," he said calmly. "She'll do it again if needed." More laughter from the Zorthak section. Kretak's grin grew wider. "Kept the peace?" the ambassador mocked. "Your species has been in space for what? 50 years? The hegemony was building star empires when your people were still throwing rocks at each other." Several alien species nodded in agreement. Humanity was new to galactic politics, having only made first contact a few decades ago. Their technology looked primitive, their ships were small and few, and their military record was essentially non-existent in galactic terms. "Age doesn't always equal wisdom," Morrison replied, "and new doesn't always mean weak." Kretak's eyes flashed with anger at being contradicted. The Zorthak were not used to defiance, especially from species they considered inferior. "Perhaps a demonstration would settle this debate," Kretak said, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. "My flagship, the Void Crusher, could test this human confidence. A simple combat exercise to show the galaxy what real protection looks like." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Direct challenges between military vessels were rare in diplomatic settings. They usually meant one side was preparing for war and wanted to establish dominance first. The peaceful species looked terrified. If humanity's only representative ship was destroyed, they would be left completely defenseless against Zorthak expansion. But if Morrison refused the challenge, it would prove human weakness and accomplish the same goal. Captain Morrison looked around the chamber, taking in the worried faces of potential allies and the eager expressions of those who wanted to see humanity humbled. His crew sat quietly behind him, showing no emotion despite the impossible situation they faced. "You're challenging the Liberty to single combat?" Morrison asked, his voice steady. "I am offering to demonstrate the difference between real military power and desperate pretension," Kretak replied. "Unless, of course, you would prefer to withdraw your claims to the Outer Rim territories now and save everyone the embarrassment." The trap was perfect. Accept the challenge and face almost certain destruction against a Zorthak dreadnought. Refuse and admit that humanity couldn't protect anyone, leaving the smaller species with no choice but to surrender to the hegemony. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. In that silence, the future of dozens of civilizations seemed to hang in the balance. The peaceful species held their breath, hoping against hope that somehow the humans had hidden strength. The military powers waited to see human weakness confirmed. Then Morrison smiled slightly. Not the confident grin of someone who knew they would win, but the calm expression of someone who had already made their choice long ago. "Very well, Ambassador," he said. "The Liberty accepts your challenge." The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting questions and protests. The Murdani delegate Silmara swam frantically in her tank, trying to get Morrison's attention to beg him to reconsider. The Hyveron clustered together, their clicking voices creating a sound like breaking glass. Through it all, Kretok stood like a mountain, his red eyes gleaming with satisfaction. This was exactly what he had wanted, a chance to destroy human credibility in front of the entire galaxy. "Excellent," the Zorthak ambassador boomed over the noise. "Captain Vorgash of the Void Crusher will be delighted to provide this educational demonstration. Shall we say tomorrow at noon, Galactic Standard Time?" Morrison nodded once. Tomorrow at noon, as the session dissolved into chaos with delegates rushing to contact their governments and military advisors calculating odds, Captain Morrison and his crew walked calmly toward the exit. Behind them, the chamber buzzed with excited voices, discussing the coming battle. Most of the talk centered on how quickly the human ship would be destroyed and what that would mean for galactic politics. Betting pools were already forming, with odds heavily favoring the Zorthak flagship. Some aliens were discussing memorial services for the brave but foolish human crew, but a few observers noticed something that others missed. Captain Morrison walked with the steady pace of someone who wasn't worried about tomorrow's battle. His crew showed no signs of fear or doubt. For people facing almost certain death, they seemed remarkably calm. First Officer Lisa Grant fell into step beside her captain as they left the chamber. "Sir," she said quietly, "are we really doing this?" Morrison's response was so low that only his crew could hear it. "Lisa, it's time for the galaxy to learn some history." Behind them, the diplomatic chaos continued, but ahead lay a battle that would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity and their impossible ship. News of the challenge spread through Kepler Station like wildfire. Within hours, every being on the massive facility knew that tomorrow would bring a battle between the human ship Liberty and the Zorthak flagship Void Crusher. The reaction was almost universal. This would be the shortest military engagement in galactic history. In the station's many bars and gathering places, aliens discussed the upcoming battle with a mixture of excitement and pity. The general consensus was that Captain Morrison had either lost his mind or was planning some kind of elaborate suicide to avoid the shame of backing down. 5 minutes, said a Veltar officer, raising his drink in a mock toast. That's how long the human ship will last once the Void Crusher starts shooting. You're being generous, replied his companion, a trader from the Korth Empire. I give them 2 minutes before their hull is melted slag. At a table across the bar, a group of Murdani delegates sat in portable water tanks, their musical voices carrying tones of sadness. They had hoped humanity might be strong enough to stand against Zorthak expansion. Now it seemed their hopes would die with the Liberty's crew. Perhaps we should start negotiating surrender terms now, one of them sang mournfully. At least we might get better treatment if we submit before the battle demonstrates our complete helplessness. The Hyveran delegates agreed with nervous clicking sounds. Their compound eyes reflected the bar's lights as they discussed which of their colonies might be sacrificed first to satisfy Zorthak demands. But not everyone was convinced the battle would go as expected. In a quiet corner of the diplomatic section, an elderly Nathara floated in her containment suit and studied data streams flowing across her personal display. Her gaseous form shifted colors as she processed information, showing the deep thought that her species was known for. The betting odds don't make sense, she whispered to her aide, a younger Nathara whose orange glow indicated confusion. What do you mean, Elder Vashati? The Zorthak ship outguns the human vessel by every measurable factor. That's exactly what bothers me, Vashati replied, her form shifting to the blue-green color that meant deep analysis. No military commander accepts certain death without reason. Either Captain Morrison is insane, or we're missing something important. Meanwhile, in the observation decks overlooking the docking bays, crowds gathered to watch the two ships that would fight tomorrow. The contrast was striking and seemed to confirm every prediction about the battle's outcome. The Void Crusher dominated Docking Bay 3. The Zorthak flagship was over 2 kilometers long, its hull a perfect black surface that seemed to absorb light itself. Energy barriers shimmered around the massive vessel like heat waves, and weapon ports glowed with barely contained power. Just looking at it made smaller species nervous. Captain Vorgash stood on his ship's bridge, reviewing tactical displays with satisfaction. He was typical of Zorthak military leadership, huge, aggressive, and completely confident in his superiority. His ship had destroyed dozens of enemy vessels in the Hegemony's expansion wars, and tomorrow would just add another victory to his record. "Sir, should we prepare the disruptor cannons?" asked his weapons officer, a scarred veteran of many battles. "No need for the heavy weapons," Vorgash replied with a dismissive gesture. "Standard plasma batteries will be more than enough. We want to destroy them quickly, but not so fast that the other species miss the lesson." The crew around him nodded in agreement. They had seen what Zorthak weapons could do to primitive ships. Usually one volley was enough to end any fight. In contrast, the Liberty sat quietly in Docking Bay 7 like an old warrior resting before battle. Maintenance crews had spent the day working on her hull, but their efforts only seemed to highlight how ancient and worn the ship appeared. Scorch marks from old battles covered her armor plating. Welds and patches showed centuries of repairs and modifications. Alien observers pointed out the obvious flaws in human design. The ship's weapons were clearly kinetic systems, metal barrels that fired physical projectiles instead of energy beams. Her engines used chemical thrust instead of the gravity manipulation favored by advanced species. Even her hull was made of primitive materials that any modern weapon should pierce easily. "It's like watching someone bring a sword to a plasma fight," commented a Veltar engineer who had come to study the human ship. Brave, perhaps, but completely pointless. Inside the Liberty, Captain Morrison's crew went about their preparations with calm efficiency. The bridge hummed with quiet activity as systems were checked and rechecked. But there was no panic, no desperate last-minute modifications, no signs that they understood how hopeless their situation appeared. Chief Engineer Pete Collins ran diagnostics on equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. His readings showed everything operating within normal parameters, though aliens watching would wonder how anything so primitive could function at all. "Fusion reactors are stable," Pete reported. "All systems show green across the board." "Weapons loaded and ready," added Amy Turner from her station. The physical ammunition she was checking seemed laughably inadequate compared to the energy weapons other species used. First Officer Lisa Grant coordinated with the bridge crew, her movements precise and professional. She showed none of the fear that observers expected from someone facing certain death in a few hours. "Sir, Kepler Station is requesting our final intentions," she reported to Captain Morrison. "They want to know if we need any special arrangements." Morrison understood what that meant. The station officials were asking if the humans wanted help preparing funeral services or sending final messages to Earth. The question was asked with diplomatic politeness, but the assumption was clear. "Tell them we appreciate their concern," Morrison replied calmly, "but the Liberty will handle her own affairs." As night fell over Kepler Station, or what passed for night in the artificial day cycles of space, the two crews prepared in very different ways. Aboard the Void Crusher, Zorthak warriors celebrated their coming victory with traditional war songs and promises of the glory they would win. Their captain had promised them an easy battle followed by rich rewards when the Outer Rim territories fell under hegemony control. Aboard the Liberty, the mood was quieter but no less determined. The human crew went through their routines with the steady professionalism of people who had done this many times before. There was no celebration, but there was also no despair. Captain Morrison stood in his quarters looking out at the stars through a small viewport. His cabin was simple and functional, decorated only with a few personal items and official certificates. On his desk sat an old photograph showing the Liberty from her early days, though the image was too faded to make out much detail. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Lisa Grant entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Real Earth coffee, one of the few luxuries the Liberty maintained during long voyages. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, offering him one of the cups. Morrison accepted it gratefully. The coffee was hot and bitter, exactly the way he liked it. "Too much to think about," he admitted. "Tomorrow changes everything." "Are you sure we're ready for that?" "Once we show them what the Liberty can really do, there's no going back to being underestimated." Morrison sipped his coffee and considered the question. For decades, humanity had been content to let other species see them as newcomers with primitive technology. It had been safer that way, allowing them to operate without drawing too much attention. But the Zorthak hegemony had forced their hand. Their expansion threatened too many innocent civilizations, and someone had to stand against them. If that meant revealing secrets that had been kept for centuries, so be it. "The galaxy is changing, Lisa," he said finally. "We can't protect people from the shadows forever. Maybe it's time they knew the truth about who we really are." Outside his viewport, Kepler Station's lights twinkled like stars. Throughout the massive facility, beings from across the galaxy prepared to witness what they believed would be humanity's final defeat. They had no idea that tomorrow would rewrite everything they thought they knew about human history. In a few hours, the Liberty would face the Void Crusher in combat. The aliens expected a quick demonstration of Zorthak superiority, followed by human surrender. Instead, they were about to learn that some secrets had been hidden for very good reasons, and that the quiet ship in Docking Bay 7 had stories to tell that would change the galaxy forever. The designated combat zone lay empty in space, marked only by sensor buoys that would record the battle for posterity. Kepler Station had moved to a safe distance, its observation decks packed with spectators from dozens of species. Emergency. Medical teams stood ready, though most observers doubted there would be anything left to rescue from the human ship. The Void Crusher arrived first, sliding through space with predatory grace. Her black hull absorbed the light from nearby stars, making her look like a hole cut in reality itself. Energy barriers flickered around the massive vessel, and her weapon ports glowed with contained power. Captain Vorgash had positioned his ship to give the best view to the watching aliens. He wanted them all to see what happened to species that defied the Zorthak hegemony. "All weapon systems armed and ready," reported his tactical officer. "Shall I target their engines first to disable them?" "No," Vorgash replied, his red eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Hit their weapons first. I want them alive long enough to surrender properly before we finish them." A few minutes later, the Liberty emerged from behind Kepler Station. Compared to the sleek menace of the Zorthak flagship, she looked like a relic from a forgotten age. Her gray hull was scarred and patched, her weapons obviously primitive, her engines trailing wisps of what appeared to be chemical exhaust. On the observation decks, aliens pressed against the viewports to watch the mismatch unfold. The betting pools had closed hours ago with final odds of 800 to 1 in favor of the Zorthak ship. A few sentimental beings had placed small wagers on the humans out of pity, but no one seriously expected an upset. "This is painful to watch," muttered Commander Silmoth to his Veltar officers. "It's like watching children play war with adults." In the diplomatic sections, the smaller species watched with growing despair. The Merdani delegates huddled in their tanks, their musical voices carrying notes of mourning. The Hyveron clicked, nervously, already discussing which colonies they would sacrifice first when the Zorthak came for them. But Elder Vashati of the Nethara watched the human ship with growing curiosity. Her gaseous form had shifted to deep purple, indicating intense concentration. "Something is wrong with this picture," she whispered to her aide. "Elder, look at how they move. That's not the desperate flight of a doomed crew. That's confidence." The 2 ships took positions on opposite sides of the combat zone. The Void Crusher's massive bulk dwarfed the Liberty like a whale facing a minnow. Captain Vorgash opened a communication channel to give the humans one last chance to surrender with dignity. "Human vessel, this is your final opportunity to withdraw." His voice boomed across the void. "Submit now and your deaths will be quick." Captain Morrison's reply was calm and steady. Void Crusher, the Liberty is ready to proceed. Good luck. Vorgash's expression darkened at the human's casual tone. He had expected fear, pleading, perhaps desperate bravado. Instead, Morrison sounded like he was wishing a neighbor well before a friendly competition. Your funeral, the Zorthak captain growled. All weapons, fire at will. The Void Crusher unleashed hell itself. Antimatter torpedoes streaked across space, each one carrying enough destructive power to level a city. Plasma beams followed, coherent streams of superheated matter that could melt through any known armor. The energy discharge was so massive that Kepler Station's sensors temporarily overloaded. The light show was spectacular. Space filled with brilliant colors as weapons that cost more than most planets' annual budgets painted destruction across the void. Observers shielded their eyes from the glare, then waited for it to fade so they could see the wreckage of the human ship. But when the light died away, the Liberty was still there. Not only was she still there, she appeared completely undamaged. The antimatter torpedoes had struck her hull and simply stopped. The plasma beams had washed over her armor like water over stone, leaving no mark at all. Captain Vorgash stared at his tactical display in disbelief. What? Impossible, nothing could survive that barrage. His weapons officer checked and rechecked his readings. Sir, all weapons hit their target. Energy output was nominal. But the human ship shows no damage at all. On Kepler Station, the cheering died in alien throats. Beings who had been celebrating the coming destruction of human arrogance now pressed closer to viewports, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Did their shields absorb the impact? Asked a Veltar engineer. They don't have shields, replied his companion, studying sensor readings with growing confusion. No energy barriers, no defensive fields of any kind, it's just hull armor. But what kind of armor could withstand antimatter weapons without showing so much as a scorch mark? Aboard the Liberty, Captain Morrison's crew remained calm despite the massive attack they had just survived. Amy Turner checked her weapon systems one final time, her movements precise and professional. All systems nominal, Captain, she reported. Ready to return fire. Fire when ready, Amy. The Liberty's weapons looked primitive compared to the energy cannons of other species. Her main guns were clearly kinetic systems, metal barrels that fired physical projectiles. Most advanced civilizations had abandoned such weapons centuries ago in favor of energy-based systems that moved at light speed and carried more destructive power. But when the Liberty fired, something impossible happened. The tungsten rounds that left her guns moved at significant fractions of light speed, accelerated by magnetic systems that generated power levels that shouldn't have been possible from such a small ship. The projectiles crossed the distance to the Void Crusher almost instantaneously, striking the flagship's energy barriers with tremendous force, and then they punched straight through. The Zorthak shields, designed to stop energy weapons and deflect matter disruptors, had no defense against simple physical objects moving at relativistic speeds. The barriers that had protected the flagship through dozens of battles simply parted like mist before the tungsten rounds. The first volley tore massive holes in the Void Crusher's hull, armor plating that could withstand plasma beams, and antimatter. Explosions was shredded like paper by kinetic impacts that delivered more energy than most ships' reactors could produce. Impossible! Vorgash roared as damage reports flooded his bridge. Our shields are impenetrable. Sir, the projectiles went right through them, his tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Our barriers can't stop solid matter moving. At those velocities, the observation decks of Kepler Station erupted in chaos. Aliens who had been certain of human defeat now watched in shock as their assumptions crumbled. The primitive kinetic weapons that everyone had mocked were tearing apart one of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. Commander Zilmoth grabbed a sensor technician by the arm. How are they generating that much power? Their reactors look centuries out of date. The technician's four eyes darted between his displays and the battle outside. Sir, I don't know. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Elder Vashati's gaseous form had turned bright gold, the color of revelation among her people. Now I understand. she whispered. "We've been looking at this. All wrong. Elder, that ship isn't primitive, it's ancient." The Liberty continued her relentless barrage, her weapons firing with mechanical precision that spoke of centuries of refinement. Each shot found its target. Each impact dealt devastating damage to the Zorthak flagship. The human ship moved through space with grace that belied her battered appearance, dodging return fire while maintaining perfect accuracy with her own weapons. Captain Morrison watched the battle unfold with calm professionalism. This wasn't the desperate struggle that observers expected. It was a demonstration of capabilities that had been hidden for far too long. "Target their main weapons," he ordered. "Let's end this quickly." Amy Turner adjusted her aim and fired, again. The tungsten round struck the Void Crusher's primary weapon systems, silencing the massive energy cannons that had terrorized dozens of worlds. Secondary explosions rippled through the flagship's hull as power systems overloaded and ammunition stores detonated. Captain Vorgash found himself commanding a crippled ship that was being systematically destroyed by weapons his people had considered obsolete. The carefully planned demonstration of Zorthak's superiority had become a humiliating defeat that would be remembered across the galaxy. "All weapons offline," his tactical officer reported. "Hull breaches on 17 decks. We're losing power." Through the chaos of his bridge, Vorgash stared at the human ship that had done the impossible. The Liberty looked exactly the same as when the battle started. No damage, no signs of strain. Just an old ship going about her business with deadly efficiency. For the first time in his military career, the proud Zorthak captain began to understand what fear meant. And in the back of his mind, a terrible question began to form. If this ancient human ship could destroy his flagship so easily, what else had the galaxy been wrong about? The battle was far from over, but already it had changed everything. On Kepler Station, beings from across the galaxy watched their assumptions about human weakness crumble along with the Void Crusher's hull. The age of underestimating humanity was coming to an end, and with it the galaxy's understanding of its own history was about to be rewritten. The destruction of the Void Crusher's weapon system sent shockwaves through every alien fleet watching the battle. What had started as entertainment, watching a primitive species get crushed, had become something none of them could explain. Emergency communication channels opened between ships as military analysts tried to understand what they were seeing. On the observation deck of his flagship, Commander Zilmoth of the Veltar grabbed his science officer by the shoulder. "Scan. That human ship again. Full spectrum analysis." The insectoid officer's compound eyes reflected the light of distant explosions as she worked frantically at her console. "Sir, I'm getting readings that don't make sense. The hull composition shows materials I've never seen before." "What do you mean?" "The armor isn't just steel and ceramic like we thought. There are layers of something else, materials that our databases don't recognize, and the energy signatures from their reactors." She paused, checking her readings 3 times before continuing. "Sir, this is impossible, but the power output suggests technology that predates our current galactic civilization." Zilmoth felt a chill run through his purple skin. "That's impossible. Humans have only been spacefaring for 50 years. But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. The evidence of his own eyes was hard to argue with. The Liberty had just shrugged off weapons that should have turned her into vapor, then responded with kinetic systems that cut through advanced shields like they weren't there. Aboard the Murdani vessel Flowing Current, their senior analyst was reaching similar conclusions. The aquatic being's gills fluttered with excitement as she processed scan data. "Delegate Silmara," she sang in their musical language, "you need to see this immediately." The Murdani delegate swam quickly to the analysis station, her scaled form moving gracefully through the water-filled corridors of her ship. "What have you found?" "Carbon dating of the human ship's core structure. The readings are disturbing." Silmara looked at the data and felt her heart skip a beat. "This says their ship is over 1,000 years old. That can't be right. I've run the analysis 5 times. The results are consistent. That vessel predates first contact with most species in this sector. It predates the formation of the current Galactic Council. If these readings are accurate, that ship was already ancient when our civilizations first reached the stars. The revelation spread through the alien fleets like wildfire. What they had dismissed as a primitive newcomer species was piloting a vessel older than most of their recorded histories. But that raised questions that made military commanders across the galaxy very uncomfortable. If humans had been spacefaring for over 1,000 years, where had they been? Why had they only revealed themselves recently? And most importantly, what else were they hiding? Elder Vashti of the Nathara had been conducting her own investigation. Her gaseous form pulsed, with colors that indicated deep analysis and growing understanding. "Connect me to the Galactic Historical Archives," she ordered her aide. "Elder, in the middle of a battle. This is more important than any single battle. Do it now." As the connection established, Vashti began searching through centuries of historical records. She was looking for anomalies, unexplained events, mysterious interventions that might take on new meaning in light of what they were learning. What she found made her form shift to the pure white color that indicated shock among her people. "By the void," she whispered. "They've been here all along. The historical records were full of them once you knew what to look for. Reports of ghost ships that appeared during major conflicts, intervened decisively, then vanished without explanation. Mysterious vessels using primitive kinetic weapons that somehow proved devastatingly effective against advanced technology. The Korthveltar War of 847 galactic years ago ended suddenly when both fleets were attacked by unknown ships using projectile weapons that cut through their most advanced defenses. The pirate wars of 623 years ago collapsed when the major pirate fleets were systematically destroyed by vessels that appeared from nowhere, struck with impossible precision, then disappeared back into deep space. The Zethkari genocide of 445 years ago stopped when the aggressor fleets simply vanished overnight, their crews found unconscious and their weapons disabled by unknown attackers. Dozens of incidents across centuries of galactic history, always the same pattern. Mysterious ships appearing when innocent lives were threatened using kinetic weapons that shouldn't have been effective against modern defenses, then vanishing as quickly as they came. The reports had been dismissed as exaggerations or confused accounts from traumatized survivors. No one had connected them because no one had imagined they might all be the same group of ships. Meanwhile, the battle continued to unfold in ways that defied every prediction. The Void Crusher, pride of the Zorthak fleet, was being systematically dismantled by what looked like museum exhibit. Captain Vorgash found himself facing the humiliation of defeat at the hands of a species he had considered inferior. "Sir?" his communications officer called out. "We're receiving damage reports from across the ship. Hull breaches on 23 decks, main power at 40%, life support failing in sections 7 through 12. Vorgash slammed his massive fist against his command chair. "How is this possible? Our intelligence reports said humans were newcomers with primitive technology." But as he watched the Liberty maneuver with fluid grace around his crippled flagship, a terrible understanding began to dawn. This wasn't the clumsy desperation of primitives fighting beyond their capabilities. This was the smooth professionalism of a crew that had done this many, many times before. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chaos on the Zorthak bridge, calm and steady despite the violence surrounding his words. "Captain Vorgash, this is your opportunity to surrender with honor. Your ship is crippled, your crew is in danger, and continuing this fight will only cost lives unnecessarily. The offer of surrender, from the species that was supposed to be begging for mercy." The reversal was so complete that Vorgash almost couldn't process it. "What are you?" he asked, his voice carrying across open channels to every ship in the area. "What is humanity really?" Morrison's response would be recorded and analyzed by every military intelligence service in the galaxy for decades to come. "We are the descendants of Earth's first interstellar colonists. When our homeworld faced ecological collapse over 1,000 years ago, our ancestors took to the stars not as conquerors, but as guardians. Ships like the Liberty have been protecting developing civilizations from threats like yours for centuries." In the year Silence that followed was absolute. Every alien in the watching fleets tried to process the implications of what they had just heard. Humanity hadn't arrived on the galactic scene 50 years ago. They had been there all along, watching from the shadows, protecting younger species from predators and tyrants. The primitive ships they piloted weren't the best they could build. They were disguised vessels designed to look outdated while hiding capabilities that surpassed anything the rest of the galaxy had achieved. Commander Zilmoth's voice was barely a whisper. The ghost ships, the phantom fleets, they were all human, finished his science officer. Every unexplained intervention, every mysterious rescue, every time a threat to civilian population suddenly vanished without explanation. It was them. On the bridge of the flowing current, Delegate Silmara asked the question that every peaceful species was thinking. How many times have they saved us without us knowing? The answer came from Morrison himself, as if he had heard her across the void. Enough times that we hoped we'd never have to reveal ourselves. But the galaxy is entering a new phase of development. Threats are emerging that require unity, not secrecy. It's time for humanity to step fully into the light. As if to emphasize his words, the Liberty's hull began to shimmer. What had appeared to be simple metal plating shifted and flowed, revealing underlying systems that no alien had ever seen before. The ship's weapons reconfigured themselves, showing capabilities that had been hidden behind deliberately primitive-looking housings. The ancient vessel that had been dismissed as obsolete revealed itself to be more advanced than anything in the galaxy. But that advancement came not from superior technology alone, but from 1,000 years of experience protecting others, learning from every battle, refining every system to serve a single purpose, keeping the peace in a dangerous universe. Captain, Forgash stared at his tactical displays as they showed the true capabilities of the ship that had destroyed his flagship. The readings were beyond anything his people had ever encountered, representing technology developed over centuries by a species that had dedicated itself to being the galaxy's hidden guardians. "We surrender," he said quietly. Then, louder, "The Void Crusher surrenders to the Liberty." But the surrender of one ship was just the beginning. As news of the battle's true outcome spread through the galactic communication networks, every species would have to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the universe. The age of human secrecy was ending, but their role as the galaxy's protectors was just being revealed. The surrender of the Void Crusher sent ripples through every watching fleet, but Captain Morrison wasn't finished with his revelations. As rescue ships moved toward the crippled Zorthak flagship, the Liberty underwent another transformation that made alien observers question everything they thought they knew about the limits of technology. The ship's hull, which had appeared to be simple metal plating held together by primitive welds, began to flow like liquid. Sections reconfigured themselves, revealing weapon systems that shouldn't have been possible according to current physics. What the aliens had mistaken for chemical thrusters showed their true nature as gravity manipulation drives that could accelerate the ship without affecting the crew inside. "By the void," whispered Commander Zilmoth as he watched through his flagship's sensors. "What else have they been hiding?" His science officer was frantically trying to catalog the changes occurring in the human vessel. "Sir, the energy signatures are off every scale we have. Whatever they're using for power makes our best reactors look like children's toys." The transformation wasn't just for show. As the Liberty revealed her true capabilities, she was also demonstrating the depth of human commitment to their role as guardians. Systems that had been hidden for centuries emerged into view. Medical bays designed to treat wounded from dozens of species, manufacturing facilities that could produce spare parts for alien ships, communication arrays that could interface with every known technology. This wasn't just a warship. It was a mobile peacekeeping platform designed to protect and assist civilizations across the galaxy. Elder Vashiti's gaseous form had shifted through every color in the Nethara emotional spectrum as she processed what she was learning. Her aide watched nervously as the Elder's form pulsed with rapid changes between amazement, understanding, and what might have been relief. "Elder, are you well?" I'm beginning to understand the true scope of what we're witnessing, Vashati replied. This isn't just about one ancient ship. Connect me to the Galactic Emergency Broadcast Network. As the connection established, Vashati began transmitting her historical research to every major civilization in the galaxy. The pattern she had discovered in the archives painted a picture that would reshape galactic politics forever. For over 1,000 years, humanity had been the galaxy's silent protectors. Every time an aggressive species threatened to overwhelm peaceful civilizations, mysterious ships would appear to stop them. Every time pirates or slavers threatened trade routes, phantom fleets would eliminate the threat. Every time genocide loomed, the aggressors would find their fleets disabled or destroyed by forces that struck from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The peaceful species of the galaxy had survived not through their own strength or the protection of other advanced civilizations, but because an ancient human fleet had been watching over them like guardian angels. How many ships like the Liberty are out there? Asked Delegate Silmara of the Murdani, her musical voice carrying across the communication networks. Captain Morrison's answer sent chills through every military commander in the watching fleets. Enough to do what needs to be done. The Liberty is just one of many vessels that have served the Guardian fleet over the centuries. Some are older, some newer, but all dedicated to the same mission. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been hiding one ancient warship. They had been operating an entire fleet of advanced vessels throughout galactic space. The primitive newcomers had actually been watching and protecting the galaxy longer than most species, had been spacefaring. Captain Vorgash, rescued from his crippled flagship and now aboard a Zorthak medical vessel, found himself facing a reality that shattered everything he had believed about Zorthak superiority. His species prided themselves on being conquerors, on taking what they wanted from weaker civilizations, but they had been operating under the watchful eyes of guardians who could have stopped them at any time. The only reason the hegemony had been allowed to exist was because humanity had been waiting for them to cross a line that would justify intervention. Sir, his aide said quietly, our intelligence networks are reporting similar encounters throughout hegemony space. Ships matching the Liberty's configuration have been spotted near our forward bases. Our expansion fleets in the outer rim have gone silent. Vorgash closed his red eyes and felt the weight of defeat settle on his shoulders. The demonstration at Kepler Station hadn't been a single battle. It had been the signal for a coordinated response to Zorthak aggression. Across the galaxy, human guardian ships were emerging from the shadows to put an end to the hegemony's expansion. The age of Zorthak dominance was over before most of their leadership even realized it had begun. But the revelations weren't finished. As rescue operations continued and the immediate crisis passed, Captain Morrison received a transmission that would complete the transformation of galactic understanding. Captain, this is Admiral Sarah Brooks of the UES Constitution. We're receiving your signal and moving to support. On every sensor screen in the area, new contacts began appearing. Ships that matched the Liberty's general configuration but showed variations that spoke to different roles and capabilities. Medical ships, supply vessels, mobile command platforms, and yes, warships that made even the transformed Liberty look small. The Constitution herself was a sight that made alien observers understand just how outclassed they had always been. 3 times the size of the Liberty, her hull bore the scars of centuries of battles fought to protect species that never knew she existed. When she revealed her true capabilities, the energy signatures made Kepler Station's most sensitive instruments overload. Admiral Brooks? Morrison replied with obvious relief. Good to see you again. How many ships are we bringing out of hiding? All of them, Jake. The Council has decided it's time to end the masquerade. The galaxy needs to know who we are and what we stand for. As Admiral Brooks spoke, more human vessels appeared throughout the sector, ships that had been disguised as asteroids, hidden in nebulae, or simply running with systems that made them invisible to alien sensors. The Guardian fleet that had protected galactic civilization for over a millennium was revealing itself in full. Commander Zilmoth found himself staring at tactical displays that showed human vessels throughout Veltar space. Ships that had been watching his people for decades, ready to intervene if they threatened peaceful neighbors. The realization that his entire military career had been conducted under human observation was deeply humbling. "How do we proceed from here?" he asked over open channels, his question directed to any human willing to answer. Admiral Brooks's response carried the authority of someone who had spent centuries making decisions that affected entire civilizations. "The same way we always have, Commander, by working together to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The only difference now is that you know we're here." The assembled alien fleets began to understand that this revelation represented opportunity as much as humiliation. For the peaceful species, it meant that their protectors were stepping into the light, offering open alliance instead of hidden guardianship. For the military powers, it meant a chance to join something greater than conquest and dominance. The Zorthak hegemony's expansion was finished, but that didn't mean the galaxy's problems were solved. There were other threats emerging from the dark spaces between stars, ancient evils that even the Guardian fleet would struggle to contain alone. "The galaxy is entering a new age," Morrison announced to the assembled fleets. "Humanity can no longer protect you in secret. The threats we face require unity, cooperation, and the combined strength of all our civilizations. We offer our hand in friendship to all who will take it." As the human fleet took formation around Kepler Station, the station itself became the center of the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Representatives from every major civilization requested immediate audiences. The Merdani wanted to formalize the protection they had unknowingly enjoyed. The Veltar sought to transform their military traditions to serve a greater purpose. Even some Zorthak commanders, their imperial ambitions shattered by the revelation of human capabilities, asked to discuss how their forces might serve the greater good instead of their own expansion. The Liberty, her ancient hull once again disguised as simple metal plating, docked at Kepler Station to begin the process of reshaping galactic civilization. Captain Morrison and his crew had revealed humanity's greatest secret, but they had also opened the door to a future where the galaxy's protectors worked alongside those they protected. As he walked through the station's corridors, Morrison reflected on the 1,000 years of hidden service that had led to this moment. The Liberty and ships like her had done their job well, preserving peace and protecting the innocent. But now it was time for a new chapter in galactic history, one where humanity's ancient guardians would stand openly alongside their allies. Though Age of Secrets was ending, but the Age of Guardianship would continue. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, full of threats that would challenge even the combined might of all civilizations working together. But for the first time in 1,000 years, they wouldn't face those threats alone. The Guardians had stepped into the light, and the galaxy would